Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eisner-Amper's Lori Reiner.
So hello everyone, can you hear me? I know that people are still walking in, but we are going to continue with the program. We're going to get started now, so if you can drag everyone from outside in the lobby, we will promise to get everybody through the program and then get to our reception after this. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lori Reiner. I'm the partner in charge of Eisner-Amper in Philadelphia. Hello. Hi Bruce, how are you? So Eisner-Amper is a national accounting firm with national practices, and one of our largest practices is our technology and life sciences practice. And PACT is really just a wonderful organization for us to spend time in and to support, and we're really, really happy to be one of the sponsors today. So several Eisner-Amper team members are here, and I wanted to also just acknowledge their leadership, in particular our colleague Joe Purcell, who I actually just saw walked in. So Joe has chaired sponsorship for this conference for many, many years now, and every year just really does a wonderful job in pulling together so many new companies to support such a wonderful organization, and we're very proud of his leadership. So thank you, Joe, from all of us at Eisner-Amper. So anyway, it's our sponsor. It's our pleasure this evening to co-sponsor the post-program reception with RCCB Law. Our friends Neil Cooper and Roger Braunfeld and John Royer, etc. We're really excited to be sponsoring that, and that will be immediately after this program, which will be happening right about 5:30, just right outside these doors. So we'll keep it nice and easy for everybody. So I hope they can all join us now. Please help me welcome back to the stage Paulina, who will moderate the panel.
Great, thank you guys. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So when we think of some questions to ask at the end of the panel with about 15 minutes left, we'll come to you. So thank you for joining me. The panel is about inclusion, partnerships, and collaboration. So let's start with you guys. You guys run two very different organizations. How do you think about collaboration and partnerships with other companies?
So the inclusion topic from earlier was around elements of race and gender. Or were we talking about working with different types of orgs?
Let's talk about organizations in terms of partnerships with some bigger organizations, and how is a small company you partner?
So I'll lead it off. So I'm a nonprofit, or I founded a nonprofit that I ran until earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And so there are two types of relationships, generally speaking, for us. One is a partnership, which means a private company gave us money, for which we're incredibly grateful, and then we do whatever they ask us to do. And then the second is when you have a relationship with another nonprofit where you have a press release and then no one does anything. Those are the two types of partnerships most nonprofits have. We vastly prefer the first, and then we're okay with the second.
And then Dan.
Yeah. Good answer. So we do, like I mentioned before, we do a lot around partnerships. And when I think about successful partnerships that we've had, they need to be very lean. So what I tell people is we don't believe in paper partnerships, for example. I worked for IBM in the past, and I loved IBM. I had a great experience there, but there's about a 100-page document you've got to review, redline, and sign off before you can even start talking about partnership, and that's really gets in the way of doing the right thing. So I think first is keeping it sort of lean and focused. The other thing I think about around good partnerships is balance. So balance is there needs to be sort of mutual value for both companies in terms of what your objectives is and what the benefits are. And in general, when we do partnerships, those benefits should be obvious and drive motivation. You shouldn't have to have benefits realized through some contractual arrangement. And the last thing is culture. What I found is if you don't have aligned values and aligned culture, then the partnership probably isn't going to work out well.
And I definitely want to get back to the culture piece later. But Laura, as a professor at Wharton, can you give us some insight into the student perspective in terms of what they look for when partnering or having relationships with industry partners like their companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what they're looking for, they're looking for a lot of the same things. They're looking for opportunities that they can grow in, similar values. One thing that I always tell a lot of my students is to not fall in love too much with the vision, to focus more on the culture, but even more so, focus on what's the particular problem that the organization is having. What is it that that organization needs you to be solving for them? Because otherwise, a lot of times people go into organizations and they flounder a little bit because they've fallen in love with the vision, the overall high-level vision, but on the day-to-day or on the more minutia, the sorts of things that they're going to be doing, they get very much lost. And so also being very cognizant of what is it that they are uniquely situated to do within these organizations? What is it that the organization is currently struggling with? What is it that the organization is going to be grappling with in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? And thinking about how you may fit at the present day, but also going forward, so that not only do you buy into that vision and that culture, but also you've got something very tangible and discrete that you're a part of.
Absolutely, and I think that tech companies in general, in venture capital is pretty exclusive, and this is about access and inclusion. So in terms of, that's an area where the tech industry has struggled in. So in what ways do you think that they can address these kinds of problems, and you guys as well in your organizations?
So Venture for America's new CEO is my former colleague, Amy Nelson. So she's very focused on issues of equity. Venture for America's last class was 43% women, 18% Black and Latino. So a lot of the problem is that, and this is not something I personally knock that many people for, which is that if you're an entrepreneur, the first people you hire tend to be people you know. And so they tend to...
Earlier you said that was okay, right?
Well, that's just, because I started a company, and then the first thing I do is like call people I know and be like, hey, like, what's going on? So that's just a structural problem that, to address it, Venture for America recruits diverse sets of people and then goes to entrepreneurs and say, hey, you need really strong people early, got these incredible young people, and look, like, they're diverse. And most entrepreneurs just want talented people, and I'd say a majority of them are actually more excited about the fact that they might hire a woman or person of color that is from outside of their natural network. So in my mind, there are a lot of structural problems. I think that it gets put at the feet of the operator a little bit too much, and because I've seen with Venture for America that they love talented people of any variety. Just the problem is that they're not in their networks.
It's a great point. I mean, Viva's about 2,200 people now. I've probably been involved with hiring over 500 people at the firm, and so the network is really important, right? It's about, so I hired a lot of the people I knew from my past. We hired on those extended networks and those references. We actually don't believe in recruiters. We work through our networks, and our managers take ownership. But I think if we could get...
Can you explain that more?
So this gets into sort of a management philosophy as well, as we believe that as a manager and leader in the organization, you need to take responsibility for building your team. And if you're going out and hitting LinkedIn and hitting the networks and trying to find people and source people, then you're going to anchor them better and take more accountability in their success within the company. You're going to feel much more accountable to that. But the network is really important. And I know for me as an operator, it is about getting the best people. And so if I can get plugged into networks that can provide that talent, that's hugely valuable to me. We absolutely want to have that.
So one of the questions earlier was, what's the success rate for Venture for America companies? Our success rate is much higher than normal because everyone who starts a company out of Venture for America has access to this talent pipeline of some of the top young people in the country. So if you imagine how many of you all are startup operators out there? Imagine if you got your pick of the top prospects in the country year after year, like what that would do to your success rate. So that's a lot of it. And again, we take pride in being able to, because 57% of college graduates today are women, as an example. So like, if it's like the majority of the talent, clearly. So if you can access that and break down the natural barriers, it's a huge competitive advantage.
What do you think about from your research in terms of recruitment?
I think you touched upon a couple of interesting things from your question. I mean, the first is I don't think it's isolated to just tech. Right, I think this tech tends to get a lot of attention, but we're seeing this in a variety of different industries. We're seeing this throughout. I think we naturally go to the networks that we have and the people we know, which is a great thing because we do know them, we feel comfortable with them, and there is this sort of embeddedness that helps with the successfulness. But that can be a double-edged sword. It can also be dangerous because the people that are typically in our networks are also those who look like us, think like us, behave like us. We are creatures that are drawn by homophily. We go to those that are familiar and have familiar thought patterns to us. And so when we start our organizations and we have people that think like us, not only does it allow us, not give us that diversity of thought, but we then continue to bring in more people who look like that because that's who their networks are. And so I think there needs to be this balance between having and drawing from these people that we trust and are from our networks, but also expanding so that we think about. Now, there's a lot that we're hearing about, let's just make sure that we're being more inclusive and, I study diversity and I'm even getting sick of hearing about diversity, but so it's not just diversity for diversity's sake, it's really about thinking, when you are an entrepreneur or you are an investor, for example, so some of the investments that I do on my own, totally outside of my day job, I have a rule of 3 where I make sure that I'm meeting whoever I'm investing in 3 different times in 3 different circumstances. So one may be a one-to-one meeting in my office, another one might be over breakfast, and another might be in a social setting. And by seeing that same person 3 different times in 3 different situations, you're getting those different personas that I talked about before. And that helps to break down some of that natural homophily that we might be projecting based on just a one-on-one meeting.
Yeah, so here's something interesting and semi-controversial that I just thought about while we were talking. I recently wrote about social capital. Basically, they launched a new investment platform called Capital as a Service. So basically what they do is if you're a startup, you apply online, you take this questionnaire, put in all your metrics, user metrics, revenue, et cetera. Then no human touches it. It's just a robot or an algorithm. They look at everything, and then they've been running a beta, and they've had 3,000 companies evaluated through this algorithm, and based on the results, without looking at the founder, without knowing their race, gender, et cetera, the system was able to make investment suggestions based on the data, and what they found is the CEO demographic skewed 42% female in all of venture capital, 2% of female founders received VC funding last year. So 42% compared to 2%, as well as majority non-white. So what do you guys think about just everything getting wiped by robots and letting them make the decisions and recruitment decisions as well?
I think it's great in practice, but I don't think it's realistically something that I would do even, or I think lots of other people do, because there's just different pieces of information that we need to rely on. One piece of information is sort of you throw all of this data into an algorithm and it spits you out the correct answer, but that's really not the investment, that's not the investing game, right? Because then everybody's portfolio would look very, very similar. There would be no sort of arbitrage opportunities. We wouldn't be able to identify those home runs, or there's just lots of sort of nuance that goes into these decisions.
I love the algorithm because
I hate the algorithm.
Because we've been, these are my friends on Sand Hill Road hanging out, and most of them, if they're honest and have a few drinks, they're like, look, it's not like we're super brilliant. It's that 10 years ago, one of our partners invested in Airbnb, or one of our companies said and that defines a good firm. And then when you put them on stage and that you ask them why they did it, then they'll come up with a rationale retroactively. It's like. Right. So to your point about the fact that 42% women the algorithm says, and then in real life it's 2%. How do you remedy that? Saying, hey, change the culture will not remedy that. If you just put the algorithm in charge, apparently it would remedy that. And it makes me super pumped to hear. It also exposes a lot of the nonsense that's out there, which is that everyone retroactively explains their success. That's true. It's so I love it. This is coming from someone who's very scared of automation generally. Automation, not scared of it. I love automation too. What I don't love is that our institutions and most humans are not really going to be in a position to benefit from it or adapt to it positively. Many of them will lose their jobs. People tend to take that very poorly. So that's a set of problems, set of very, very large problems that are coming down the pike. But trying to make clubby human beings, like sort of different humans, strikes me as impossible. And having an algorithm to be like a sounding board or like a sanity check or whatnot, or a rival. Because imagine a world where the algorithm just out-invests people. My gosh, and that, like, that'd be such a mind blower. So I'm very, anyway, automation's coming. It's going to be big, and that's one of the few instances where I actually love it.
So I would just counter that these algorithms are still created by people. And so I worry that algorithm looks great, 42% women, but these algorithms are still being created by worlds in which we have 93% venture capitalists that are men, and their thoughts, their behaviors, including the 7% women that are VC, but these algorithms are still being created in a world where we have these criteria, we have these inputs, and so by blindly following an algorithm just worries me, where we don't have that nuance that different perspectives can put into those sorts of things.
Sorry, the really frightening thing is that a lot of companies are using AI now as an employer screen. Like, that's frightening, because then you're going to have people that are unemployable across the board, because it's not like if you impress the person, like, none of that will exist anymore. It's just the AI didn't like you, which means the other AI is also not going to like you.
So, yeah, I do want to come back to that maybe later, but...
Do you guys use that?
No.
That's good. Beautiful, man. That's good.
They just use the networks. So Fortune just published the Fortune Future 50 list, which is basically a list of all the companies poised for breakout growth. And Viva was at the top of that list. And so my question is, though, growth is great, but how does the leadership make sure that the kind of breakneck growth that maybe Uber had doesn't really break the culture?
It's a good question. First, can I say congratulations to Workday for coming in number 2? Is anyone from Workday here? They're good friends of mine. We talk a lot about culture within Viva, and have made the decision over the last 10 years to make sure that our culture is defined sort of by the employee base and is organic in the way that it evolves. But we also talk about how the culture of the company needs to be stewarded by the leaders within that company.
Can you give me an example?
So hiring, we just talked about sourcing and hiring for an example. When we do sourcing and hiring, we have a methodology that we use, but the things we think about are motivation, we think about culture, and actually one of the things we talk about is something called why Viva. And most people think about that's like, why would Viva want that person, or why would that person be good for Viva? It's actually the opposite. We actually talk about why would Viva be a good place for that person and growing their career and for their future. So I think there's certain sort of fundamental things that have made us successful to date that we think will continue to be included and emphasized in the way we operate. But it all starts with hiring. If we hire the wrong people with the wrong sort of mindset, that's going to break the company.
And how big is the company right now?
So we're 2,200 people.
Oh, wow.
To give you some context, Peter, our CEO, insisted on interviewing every single person coming into the company up until person 200. I interviewed the first 200 people in our international organization, and it's still very, very involved in that process. There's also, I think, we've built a culture where we don't take shortcuts when it comes to hiring either. So 2 philosophies real quick, and then we move on. One philosophy around hiring that I've always adopted through my career, and it applies very much to Viva, is we hire based upon attitude and aptitude, not experience. I would rather take someone who's super smart and motivated than someone who's been doing the same job for 10 years. And if any of you can think of people you've worked with or hired in your past and think about different people and the profiles they have, give it 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, that person with the attitude and aptitude will run circles around the other person.
Yeah,
So that's,
we call them athletes.
Yeah.
so that's an important piece of our philosophy, but we also don't take shortcuts either. So we may have an urgent need, but if we have certain requirements and things we're looking for, we don't want to take a shortcut to make a bad hire because that'll sort of change the trajectory of the company.
And Andrew and Laura, this question is more for you guys, but right now, if I'm an early stage founder or looking to raise money, I have a lot of options, right? I can go to a traditional VC firm, I can crowdfund, I can go the initial coin offering route, which I'm personally fascinated by. But how do you guys position people, and how do I know what route is best for me?
So, in my experience, the first sources of money are still the founder's own money, their own savings, and then their direct personal network. That stuff tends to precede even the crowdfunding options, certainly the ICO and the rest of it. And that's one reason why it tends to be tied to identity in certain networks, where some people are much more able to access their own savings and their friends and family. So at Venture for America, we try and balance that by having various funding measures in place that are independent of one's identity, which is rare. Obviously.
Have a fund, right?
Yeah, we have a fund, and it's essentially guaranteed if you start a company out of VFA and you go through our accelerator, which has like an 80% acceptance rate. It's like the opposite of a normal accelerator, because in order to get into the VFA accelerator, you need to have gotten into Venture for America and then completed it. So we create like a much more supportive universe. Capital is easier to come by at certain levels now than it has been because of things like crowdfunding. I've seen many successes out of it. Though I will say crowdfunding, I've done crowdfunding competitions and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's a lot of work. It's not like you put it out and then the internet masses descend and you get money raining down on you. It's a ton of grinding it out and energy. So those things haven't really changed as much as one might hope or project.
Got it, Laura?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the company is and who the entrepreneurs are. All money is not good money. And a lot of times I think entrepreneurs and naturally and understandably are so desperate for those resources that they pursue whatever avenue they can get to get that startup capital or that seed capital. But all money is not good money. And so I think it really depends on what your company is, making sure you're not only aligning yourself and thinking about the market, but also thinking about your resources and where you're acquiring those resources for. You may go to one investor where their portfolio looks such that they really need a huge exit. And you might be a first-time entrepreneur that's totally happy with a 10 million or a 12 million exit, and that investor is going to say, no, you can't sell at 10 million. We need to continue scaling and growing and building until we hit 300 million or whatever that number they have in mind is. But there's a lot of risk as we all know, there's a lot of risk between 10 million and 300 million, and lots of companies die in that gap. And so knowing who you are, knowing what your goals are, knowing what your company is built to achieve is really important when you're seeking out that money. And so you might be able to get money from a crowdfunding campaign, or you might be able to get money from angels or VC, but it really depends on knowing your company and knowing yourself and what you're looking for.
I'd like to comment on this too. For the entrepreneurs that I've worked in and the investments I've done, I think a lot of it's board composition and where you're going to get advice and guidance. I think that the best sort of founders and entrepreneurs and innovators are the ones that are very self-aware. I think part of that self-awareness is knowing that there's good money and bad money. And a lot of times good money is defined by, yes, there's money, but there's, ask for money, you get advice, ask for advice, you get money type of thing. Think about that.
Can you just
resonates.
quickly define good money versus bad money?
So good money, in my opinion, brings with it sort of the infrastructure of thinking, philosophy, and objectives that are healthy for the growth of the company and aligned with sort of the founder and entrepreneur. That, to me, it's very simple. Where you have, and you alluded to this, where you have misaligned expectations around where the company is going is where things can really be problematic.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so final question, and then we'll come to you guys for more. But you all sit in very different places in the ecosystem. So what is one innovation that you're really excited about in the next 5 or 10 years?
One innovation we're excited about in the
like
next 5 to
in
10
the
years?
tech VC community.
So I often sit in a advisory role where I'm advising students and entrepreneurs. I also see things from an investor role where a lot of my research is on angel investors, angel investment networks, VCs. It's not necessarily a technology. I mean, I'd love to be able to say that I think AR and VR and bots and drones and, Bitcoin and all those sorts of things, but I think there's not, for one, I feel like there's still a lot of misunderstanding around what those sorts of things are. So I think it's more of a general excitement that people are willing to take chances on things that not just the end user things, but the picks and shovels, like the tools that are used to build these sorts of things. Lots of chances on that, so that's something that I'm really excited to see, that it's not just about the end consumer or the end customer or end user, but there's lots more excitement around all different stages that are leading us up to these really exciting new things.
Got it. So more the tools that are used to build.
I mean, I'm super excited for self-driving cars because my kids are, like at an age where eventually I'll have to drive them to things, and if I don't have to, that would be delightful. On a personal level, and this is like, again, they're all double-edged, but we're going to know so much about ourselves and our own health soon. Yes. So I have friends who get bought like these incredible genetic physicals by their venture capital firms because they, like for the VC firm, it's like we kind of want to know what your risks are, and you want to know what your risks are, right? And then my friends are like, yes, because all information is good. And then I'm like, is it, man? Is it? So like people at a certain end are going to know everything about their genetic makeup. And then it's fast leading to a point where having children is going to be informed by lots of pieces of information that we don't currently have.
I don't know if this answers the question per se. I'm actually excited. When I look at the next, let's say, 10 years, I'm excited about the sort of, unencumbered thinking of the next generation. I watched when my 13-year-old was about 7 years old, I walked in the kitchen. I said, well, Abigail, what are you doing? She said, I'm working on my homework. I said, well, that seems interesting. What are you doing? And she had some presentation. She goes, well, I'm working on a presentation. I said, well, how are you creating that? She said, well, I'm doing it in Google Docs. And I said to her, well, Abigail, that's, and I'm her parent, right? And showing interest. I said, that's interesting. Google Docs, that sounds really cool. What is it? And I'm not kidding you. She turned to me. She looked at me in the eye. She goes, well, Daddy, she thought about this. She goes, Daddy, Google Docs is like Microsoft Office, but for big kids. And I didn't have the, I couldn't explain to her that I spent my whole life in like Excel and PowerPoint. But I just, this unencumbered sort of, world is huge thinking that's going to come out of this next generation is just fascinating to me. And I think the speed of innovation, the speed of access to information, how we change collaboration will affect the investor community, and we'll see new type of companies that we can't even imagine today come out of that. So yeah. I'm pretty excited about that.
That's awesome. That's a great way to wrap it up. Awesome. Do you guys have any questions? Oh, no.
We were too thorough. There was.
Okay, I have another question. Oh, no? Okay, never mind.
No, someone's coming up. I see him through the lights.
Oh, no.
He appears.
I don't think.
Oh, he's coming, right? No, he's just taking a seat. That was a lot of build-up, man.
That was upsetting. Okay, well, I have a question. Oh, yeah, good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What advice can you give to someone that wants to get corporate sponsorship for their startup news website that's spotlighting on small business in a hyper-local region?
Freaking audience. I mean, You know, it's like yeah, it's like if you can prove that you're reaching the kind of people that that company wants to target, then you'll be in business. I mean, we've gotten now many corporate relationships in part because we've been able to access a national audience of college graduates, which people find very, very appealing, and then the rest of it. So that there's like, it's tough starting out though, because you know, you think you need the sponsorships first. The trick in building something is figure out everything you can do without that much money, and then do those things. Now, because there's like this natural inclination, it's like, oh, I gotta get the money, I gotta get the money. It turns out that you can do much more than you generally think without that much money. And then it's like that rap song, it's like, I don't chase money, man, money chase me. Like that's the dream, where when they start coming to you being like, you know, take my money. And it's very hard to get there, but it is possible, you just gotta grind.
Yeah, I think media is probably at a great place to be disrupted right now, so that's really cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, it's Z again. My question is about how can you guys and entrepreneurs in general to tap into the talents of corporate America so in corporate America, there are a lot of young professionals who have entrepreneurial dream deep down in their heart, but a lot of times they don't have that next step, don't have that gut to actually take that next step. So how can entrepreneurs or VCs tap into the talents of corporate America? Thanks.
So I talked to Z before, and he's like, he's got a side hustle and then a day job. So it sounds like that's what the question's about. But it was like, I'm going to be like, so I was a corporate attorney for 5 months, hated it obviously. And then I had to make a decision whether to stay and try and start a company or not. And I got to say, man, you cut the cord on that paycheck, and there's nothing that's going to motivate you more. So it's not like how can the startups like tap into corporate talent. It's like how can more corporate people cut that cord and then be like the cartoon character who runs off the cliff, who's just like got their legs pumping and like they don't know you know what I mean? Like that's the vision. And then the great thing is, and I can say this having had one company fail, another company not achieve its goals, like it doesn't kill you. You know, like no one, like I had a net worth of negative 100,000 in my 20s, like, you know, lost investors hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like no one cared except for me, it turned out. Like, and you know, I joke that like no one knows you have a net worth of negative 100,000 unless you're stupid enough to tell them, which you never do. So like it's not like how can startups access corporate talent, it's like it's how can more people realize how free they are to do what's inside of them.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
so I grew up in that corporate environment with large consulting, you know, top 5 consulting firms. And I think there are people who are big company people and small company people as well. The earlier you can sort of recognize that, I think that helps. But I know a lot of very smart, talented people in corporate America that couldn't really survive if they didn't have sort of those walls around them. And that was a hard lesson for me. When I came out of, I was at IBM at the time and came over to Viva. IBM was a great company. You know, I remember talking to Peter, our CEO, and he said, Dan, you're going to have to sort of relearn a lot of things and rethink a lot of things. And it took me, so I guess there's 2 points of advice here. If you're further along in corporate America, how do you make that transition? You need to sort of take a deep breath and realize that you need to relearn some things and be open to that education. I was a management consultant. I thought I knew everything, and I was wrong. And I learned a lot, and now I know more. I still don't know everything. And I think for people who are younger, I think that the sooner they can learn to network as well, we referred to networks earlier, I think that will give those individuals confidence, and I think it also will help calibrate their capabilities and sort of their level of risk tolerance, if you will. So that networking piece is a huge piece. And unfortunately, those networks of sort of entrepreneurs and sort of younger innovators, they won't find them necessarily in the big companies. So you got to work for that and find those networks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways that I think about that question, actually. I mean, the first, I'm always reminded of when I started my first company, and people would say, like, how did you know it was the right time? How did you know that you were going to take that leap and do that? And I remember thinking, it wasn't a question of deciding whether or not I was going to do it or not. It was a question of, I couldn't not do it. There was something that was so inspiring me to do it that the other there was things that people were trying to keep me from doing it, but I had to do it, right? And so when you have that feeling from an individual perspective, then I feel like that's where we can get some of that talent. The people who feel like they so have to do it that nothing can kind of hold them back. But the second piece of that is also what I tell a lot of my students, that it's okay to also wait, right? Just not wait too long, because we all have responsibilities. There are people in large corporations who have these responsibilities. And I also remember at the same time, when I was thinking of going into academia, I had all of these student loans to pay off, both from my undergraduate program as well as my MBA. And when I was in my MBA program, I remember asking people, what's the quickest way to pay off student loans? And everyone was like, oh, well, you go into iBanking. And I said, okay. And I remember turning to a friend and saying, like, wow, this internet banking thing is really big these days. This was a long time ago, but quickly realized it was investment banking. Went into investment banking for 2 years, and then on my 2-year anniversary, turned in my resignation letter and started a PhD program. And so sometimes you have these responsibilities where you need to take those 2 years to pay off student loans, or to develop those networks, or to develop those skill sets, and that's completely okay. It doesn't have to always be that I have to start this company and I'm going to just leap in and do it. There's a lot of value that comes from waiting and just making sure that you're not waiting too long, but taking that time to find that right time. As long as you do give yourself, I'm going to give myself 2 years, and recognize that after those 2 years, it's very easy to get caught up in the next bonus or something that's vesting or whatever's coming down the line. And so putting those controls in place for yourself as well. So.
Laura, as an example for your first company, what was the impetus where you were like, I am going to do this tomorrow and quit my job and quit the program?
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was one particular thing that, I was like, this is a great market, or this is a great.
First step?
Yeah, I think it was more just I had thought about it so much, and I had thought about it a lot. It wasn't like I came up with the idea and then the next day I was like, I'm leaving and I'm going to do this. It was a lot of thought that went into it. I still had my day job. I was doing all these other things, but it was like I would come home and I would think about it, and I would come home and I would work on it, and I was always kind of ruminating and percolating on this, talking to lots of people, and half the people would say, you're crazy, you can't do this, you can't give up this job, mostly my mom, and then the other half of the people who were like, give this a shot, all this sorts of things, and so it was really, it was really just kind of it was a long, drawn out thing where at some point I said, I have to do this. I cannot wait. I cannot not do this.
The single biggest catalyst to doing something is to tell everyone you're going to do it.
And then
because then you just don't have a choice, then you have to do it.
And do you guys, for Venture for America, do you, when students graduate college, do you encourage them to get a job first?
Yeah, they graduate from college, they get trained by us, and then they go work at a startup for 2 years, in part because we think that operating experience is super important. I think corporate training is super important. But to Laura's point also, it's like, at some point when you want to do it, and then again, we also have an accelerator and fund.
Right.
I mean, like the stuff, it's, one of the things I've learned over the last number of years is that like entrepreneurship is somewhat, it's a deeply personal thing. Like Laura said, sometimes you just care about it so much that you will take that leap. And that it becomes much easier if there are people around you who make it seem normal-ish or sane. So that's like so if you take a 23-year-old and say, hey, you're moving to Philadelphia in a group of 15 people, then that becomes perfectly normal. It's like, hey, you're going to start companies in this group, like cohort of like 12 people, is also perfectly normal. You sort of normalize things. Try and normalize the abnormal, if you will.
That's interesting. Okay, we have time for one final question. No? Okay.
Normalize the abnormal.
Well, thank you guys. Unless you have any parting thoughts.
What's your market cap now? You can't say. You have to check the stock ticker. So I just want to, again, so I commented about this book I'm writing, The War on Normal People. It's going to come out in March. Most of us in the room are going to be beneficiaries of many of the technological trends that are coming down the pike. We're educated, we're working on the future. There are just so many people out there that do not recognize what is coming and are going to be directly affected by it and are not in position to be able to sit in this sort of environment with us. And I'd urge you to dig into that set of issues because it will affect us all. I'm a parent. I've got a 5-year-old and 2-year-old, 2-year-old boys, and I'm very concerned about the future that they're going to grow up in. These problems will not address themselves. We're over-relying upon the capital markets to solve our problems, and the capital markets do not care about unemployed cashiers, truck drivers, call center workers, et cetera. And so if we imagine that these problems will fix themselves, we are fooling ourselves in very, very fundamental ways. And so if you have an interest in solving that set of issues, please do feel free to reach out to me because I see it now as a near existential set of issues that we're going to grapple with as a society in the next 10 years. And I wish we had longer, but I don't think we do.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.